have you guys been able to like view future versions of human beings and how that would look?
They were they were doing experiments recently in looking at the future and how far out can we look. And what it sounds like, and I'm by no means the expert, and I'm standing on the shoulders of my colleagues here, so forgive me. But what it looks like is the further out you go, the harder it is to predict the future. Now, there are, I'm sure, certain things that are definitely fixed in the timeline. But other things, there are so many variables the further out you go that things could change. So, 2 years ago, I could have sat down and said, who's going to win the presidential election blindly, wrote down my, description of who the winner is and gotten one answer. And then today I could sit down and do it and have a completely different answer. And for all I know, without that bigger perspective, both could be right. But between the time I did that first session and the time I'm doing this session now, so many variables have changed the future. Or is it a matter of maybe my own consciousness has changed to a different timeline? I don't know how all of this works. I'm just talking theories and ideas out there.
Life is but a dream. Life is but a dream. Life is but a dream. Yeah.
Hello, you beautiful souls. Welcome to the Praise the Sun podcast, where I'm honored to have on my guest, Dennis Nappi II. Dennis, how you doing, my friend?
Sage, I'm great. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you as well. We had an amazing conversation earlier this year, and I figured it was time to have you on my show. So, very excited to do this, talk about remote viewing, nerd out, and get into the good stuff.
I'm honored. I'm always excited to have an opportunity to speak with you, Sage. Our last conversation was pretty awesome, so I'm looking forward to this one.
Thank you so much. So, from our audience who's not familiar with you and your journey, could you give us a brief overview of how you got into the work that you're doing now?
That's a tough one to keep it brief, but I will go through my background quickly in talking about how I ended up here. I started out actually in the military, working in military intelligence, and then I moved into police work, and then I moved into education. That's my professional background. I've been a teacher for the last 15 years, working with emotional support students. At the same time, I was going through that truth seeker quest, that truth seeker journey. I had those paranormal experiences as a kid, sleep paralysis, waking up, something's in the room, a lot of weird things happening, a lot of paranormal experiences, psychic experiences. But I guess I really stepped into this full force in 2013. My father died. He died of cancer. He died of pancreatic cancer, and it was a slow, torturous process. And during that process, I started to have a series of psychic experiences. My father had some psychic experiences. We had similar dreams going on. Things were happening, noises were surrounding him, out of body experiences were going on. So when he finally, and as he's dying, let me backpedal a little bit. As my father was dying, I was getting these impressions. Long story short, of the parasitic energy parasites surrounding us. So when he died, I was like, oh man, I've completely lost my mind because I just went through some horrible trauma. But being an author, being an investigator, I started looking into things. And the more I dug, the more I found. My first objective was to find and prove, hey, is psychic communication possible? And I was expecting to find some books out there and some authors, but then I came across the research through Stanford University, SRI, and the remote viewing program back in the 70s that was then taken over by the US government and started to become declassified in 1997. So I'm going, all right, can't get a more credible source than that. Psychic communication is possible. That's great. Then I had to verify, was the information I'm getting, was it accurate? Was it correct? Just because I'm getting psychic data doesn't mean it's true or correct. And it really opened up a world of possibilities. And that journey started on, oh my gosh, we're in the pits of despair and everything's feeding on us and life is horrible, to realizing, oh my goodness, we have this forgotten superpower, things like remote viewing, things like Reiki, that really empower us, promote healing, and we can use to do things like predict the future, plan for the future, heal ourselves and grow and connect with the divine. So my work shifted from this darkness to this beautiful journey. And during that process, as I'm researching and watching podcasts, I know you just had a guest on, Edward Reardon. I reached out to him. He was just a voice I heard on YouTube, and we did this amazing interview about one of his targets. And that led to him speaking with the people at the company that was then called Crypto Viewing, now Future Forecasters, who I work for. And they reached out to me asking me if I wanted to join the team and interview, do podcasts, do videos with all of their remote viewers. And as a part of that, I'd say employment, but it's more than employment. I mean, it's just belonging. I was trained by Daz Smith in remote viewing, and that has been a phenomenal journey for me, combining everything that I've been through, leading me to that point to work with, in my opinion, some of the best people in the business, and just all around great people, to then not only teach me how to do this, but then I got to sit every week and watch them at their craft, watch them at their art, watch them go through it with 30 plus years experience with each of them. It's just been an amazing journey as I step into remote viewing and now explore my own mind and the universe around me.
Wow, fascinating. The so you said that there were like parasitic uh things are kind of feeding on you. Can you elaborate more on that?
Yeah, that was the focus. I was writing a book. So let me go back to 2009 roughly. I have two books in this series right now. It's called the I Am Human series. And back in 2009, I remember clearly I was standing in my backyard and I started to get these feelings, like just in I guess my crown and my heart chakra. And I was having a hard time sleeping in the weeks that followed that. And I had all this stuff just running through my head, and it was nature of reality stuff. What is reality? What is real? Who are we? What's our role? All this stuff's just bouncing around, and I couldn't sleep, couldn't sleep. So one night at like 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm going out of my mind, and I sat down and I just started writing. And it wasn't until really, I guess, in the past month, as I'm exploring remote viewing and things like automatic writing, I realized this was my first instance of automatic writing, just letting the intuition flow through me and writing what came down. So I'm just getting all these thoughts out. And I ended up handwriting this 9-page essay that I called I Am Human. And it presented the world to me in a different light. It gave me a different perspective on who we are and what is the nature of our reality. Looking at things in terms of perspective, like we look at chickens, right? Chickens look at us as these, beings that consume them and eat them. We must be pretty terrifying to some of them. Yet the family dog looks at us as this loving, caring member of the pack. And then I looked at things like nature. I started studying nature through this essay. And, I was always thinking, well, nature is all good. It's all loving. It's balance. And then you really start looking at nature and it's like, well, there's this cruel side to nature when you start exploring parasitism. And then you start thinking, well, if we are divinely created, why would you create a parasite? That is an awful, slow, torturous way to die. So I started spinning down that rabbit hole. And I started looking into what they call the archons, who are the lords or the rulers. It comes from the Gnostic works. The Gnostic texts, a lot of them are recovered in the Nag Hammadi library, which was found in the 1940s back in Nag Hammadi, Egypt. And these were scrolls that were over 2,000 years old that were buried at the time when they were trying to expunge the world of the Gnostic teachings. So they were pretty much untouched until the 1940s when they were uncovered. And it talks about these rulers and how, the version of the Bible that we get every day has been significantly edited. And that's a whole conversation in and of itself. But I'm looking at these archons and I'm looking at works of people like Carlos Castaneda, Bob Monroe, the great astral body, out of body traveler, and they had stories about human energy and about things on the other side that consume human energy. And I started looking more and more into that and finding more sources that talk about how we're in this state of ignorance. And a lot of times we're kept in the way the world's designed, we're kept in this state of fear. And that state of fear produces a frequency of energy that Bob Monroe called loosh. And that loosh is nurtured like as if in a garden to extract it from humanity, basically, as this source of power, energy, nourishment for whatever it is that may be harvesting us. And that was really, really dark. It's fascinating to think that. I don't want to stay in that space, because as I continued to push through and understand this, I've also realized that that may be part of our journey, but there's a bigger picture, right? And I like to hold the perspective of, we would have never harnessed the power of fire if we never felt the discomfort of being cold. So I try to look at the fact that the way our system is designed is based on consumption right now. It's not bad, it's not good, it's just the way that it's designed. I don't think that it stops at this is horrible and we're these hard, powerless victims to these parasites. I think it could possibly be a part of the natural order of the universe that we don't understand yet. But it can foster tremendous spiritual and psychic growth as you look into it and you explore it. Part of it is that fear that you go through. That fear is what drives you to learn more, to overcome it, and to move through it. So I know that's a big roundabout way of answering these energy parasites, but there's so much to it, to looking into it and to getting to it. I think it ties into such a bigger picture.
Yes. Wow. Yeah. That's so. I got so many questions on that because it's very relevant towards a dream that I literally just had last night. But before I get into that, the I wanted to ask more about the parasites. Actually, was this something that you were actually observing? Like, did you see the beings feeding on you, or how did that appear?
Well, great question. I go into this in the book. I've always journaled my intuitive experiences. I've got, a couple decades worth of journals going back, which I find very valuable later in life when you're starting to look for patterns and trends and analyze things in your life. So before my father died, I had a lot of these sleep paralysis experiences. And at one point I woke up in the middle of the night and I saw this little thing. It was on my chest. I called it a goblin. And it felt like it was taking energy out of my chest. It was horrifying. And, I was in the dream state, and we can argue, maybe you just had this crazy dream. Maybe I did. But I clearly, it had a different flavor from a dream. My eyes were open. I was looking around in my bedroom. I was conscious during this. And then I ended up in a state of paralysis and being put back to sleep. And I had a few experiences of things like that, but the most profound one for me was I was lying on my couch. I was in my living room. It was 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'm watching TV. I closed my eyes. I can hear the TV program. I'm listening to the TV program, and then I heard this high-pitched, like obnoxious singing from behind my head, and it got closer and it got closer to me, and I felt something like a wand touch my head, and it sent this jolt of electricity through my body from my crown down to my feet, and it was an awful feeling. As a police officer, I got hit with a taser in training, and that's kind of what it felt like, just this horrible electric jolt running through my body. And then it casually walked away, and I was able to open my eyes. The TV program was still playing, and there was nothing there. And I had the sense, what scared me about it is how calm this experience was for the whatever being that might have been there. It was just casually singing, like, oh, I'm just going to go pick some flowers right now, then I'm going to go on back, as if I really didn't matter or wasn't going to put up any resistance whatsoever to it, or I wasn't going to be aware that it was coming. So then fast forward with those experiences in mind, the things I'm trying to understand. In the remote viewing world, sometimes we get what's called an analytical overlay. So in remote viewing, you don't want to name your target. You want to describe your target. But your conscious mind is constantly trying to solve puzzles and solve problems and figure out, oh, I know this. What is this? And sometimes it'll give you these metaphors. Sometimes it'll explain things to you in a way that might be a reference to something familiar. And when you go back and you look at your data, for example, I labeled it the Eiffel Tower, but it was the Pyramid of Giza. So it's still this large pointy structure, but my mind associated with the Eiffel Tower, even though I described the four sides of it, the wide square base, the basic gestalts are the same. So as my father was dying, I had a flashback of an old military movie about a sniper. And what happened was the sniper shot somebody and left them alive, and it kept drawing people in to try to rescue him. And every time they'd go in, the sniper would shoot that person, and it was a trap. So I had that visual flash through my mind, in the last day of my father's life, as I'm looking at my entire family being upset. I mean, the timing is important here. And I had this phrase running through my head, like, they're taking your energy. They're taking your energy. This is an emotional trap for us, not for my dad. My dad was I don't know the right word, the trigger point for us to release more emotion. The more he suffered, the more he screamed, the sadder and more upset that we got. So I had this energy parasite theme running through my mind, and at that point, I shifted my energy, and I stopped being afraid. I sat with my dad, and I started talking to him about all the lovely, wonderful memories I had. I just started putting myself in that energetic space of, how much I loved him and how much I remembered these different things that I had done as a kid, different experiences that we had, vacations we'd taken. And I tried to put myself in that energetic experience and truly feel that joy. And I did. And shortly after that, we stepped out of the room and he transitioned. He had passed. So that's when I started saying, okay, am I crazy for thinking that there's these energy parasites, or is there something to it? Which led to my research to, about 5 years to get that book written.
Wow. Fascinating. What is it, 2024? I've had experiences before I moved into my home with these energy parasites. And I remember I actually, right around the time that I had first made my YouTube channel, I had made a video on this. But what I was seeing was spiders. I was seeing a lot of black spiders. And sometimes they would be like jellyfish looking. Sometimes they would be octopus looking with tentacles. Sometimes they would just be black blobs of just energy. The most terrifying one that I've seen was I think it was a red spider, actually, which is the first time I ever seen one that had color in it, and it was like a absolutely massive spider on my bedroom door. I was freaked out. And since then, it hasn't been like that. Like they used to be really bad where they would paralyze me in my sleep, and I would have nightmares, and I would know when I'm being attacked because it would usually manifest as like some type of animal in my dream. It's usually like a squirrel, and I have no aversion to squirrels or anything, but it would usually be like I would see a squirrel in my dream, and then it would jump on me, and I would feel it on my energy body, and I would feel it crawling on me, and then I would wake up, and then I would see the black spider. So that was like that's how I was connecting the dot. Like, okay, something is feeding on me here, but I still wake up and sometimes see things moving in my bedroom, but nothing. I'm certain nothing is feeding on me. If anything, is just observing. And the closest thing that I seen that came to what I was dealing with was, which was really fascinating. What was called SPE, suppressive parasite entity, and that was the first time I read something online. I think it was on the Ascension Glossary, the website Ascension Glossary. That has but it has the archons on there as well. And that was where I first learned about the archons. But that was the first time I ever seen something that was like very closely related to what I was dealing with, like to a T. And it was really fascinating, but pretty scary.
It's scary, but it's comforting when you find that, hey, I'm not the only one that had that experience, right? Because I have had several of those insects. For me, I was seeing like large ticks that would get fatter and fatter as they fed on my energy. And I think if you look at nature as like as above, so below, right? You look at physical nature. We have decomposers, right? And their job is to consume on something that's decomposing or rotting or has passed on. And we have this toxic energy that comes off of us sometimes. I mean, I saw them more when I was really going through my darkest night of the soul. That's when I was really seeing these things. And then you get hyper fixated on them, and you're like, oh, this is a battle. I have to fight this battle. But what you're putting out is the energy that actually draws them in. The key is not to have this conflict and fear. It's to be like, okay, cool. That's a neat experience. I'm going to learn from it. And like you said, it shifts. You're still aware that they're there. They may serve a very valid purpose, right? We may need that energy consumed and transformed. Who knows what they do with it? But when you wake up and they're everywhere and it's consistent and it's scary, you don't understand the process. And that's a terrifying thing. So I've
Yeah.
definitely been there, and I've grown from it, like you. And I think doing that inner work, moving through the fear, finding tools to use to move through the fear, and it's a tough because there's a trap where a lot of us get stuck for a long time, just focused on the scary.
And that's actually really fascinating that you said that, because I've never even thought about it that way, where it's very valid, where it might be a symbiotic relationship where you might need
Mhm.
that thing to like
Right.
feed off of whatever excess negative emotions that you're creating. I was definitely going through a rough times, going through a breakup, and
Yeah.
very depressed all the time, smoking a lot of weed. It was a
Hmm.
bad time for me. So
Yeah.
naturally, of course, I was attracting those low vibrational energy beings to come and feed on me. So I completely
Right.
understand that, and I'm in a completely different space now. So
Right.
yeah,
And the experience
yeah.
changes.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So, wow. Okay. So, yeah, thank you for clarifying that, because that just took me back to when I thought about those energy beings that I was dealing with, and
Yeah.
yeah, that's wow. Okay.
That's a
So,
tough place to be. It's a real tough place to be.
yeah, I know. And I've seen other people deal with that, and I always wanted to give them some type of advice of how to deal with it. I just don't feel like I did anything differently besides like get out of that negative state of being. So maybe there's advice for
Yeah.
people for like, you know,
I would say
go
learn
ahead.
to meditate, get
Yeah.
grounded, learn to meditate,
Yeah.
find something that's empowering. I know for me, like when I learned Reiki, it gave me a sense of control over things. It gave me something to do where I could turn on my energy in certain aspects, and I realized I have more control than I always thought that I could. So I'd learn to practice yoga, meditate, be comfortable in those deep states of consciousness. So when you fall into that state of paralysis, your mind tells you, "Oh, I can meditate. I'm here. I can stay calm enough. What do I need to do? I need to think happy thoughts, right? Really, it's like Peter Pan and move through that process. It's not going to hurt me. It's doing whatever it does, but I need it to go."
Right. Yeah. I'm glad you said that, because that was actually how I got out of a lot of the paralysis state, in which
Hmm.
I would just ease out of it. Like every time I fight it, I was like, I couldn't move. So I was just like
Yeah.
focus on my breathing, and then it would
Right.
just release its grip, and then I would ease out of that state of, yeah. So,
And I've heard some people, and I believe this. It's a gateway right there. These things can be gatekeepers for us, and if you can, instead of escaping it, if you can move through it, it can lead you into altered states of consciousness and reality, into the astral plane. Sometimes those are the gatekeepers that stop us from going on and having that other experience, because we're not spiritually mature enough to step into that realm. And once you can master that fear, then you step into the new thing, and you find something else to scare you, right? Until you overcome it, and then you move past it.
exactly. Exactly. The last thing I want to mention for people who might be experiencing that is that I did experience it significantly less after I moved. So that if that is an option for you, I would definitely advise it, because everyone has their own signature frequencies that they give off. And if you're in a very condensed area, I lived in the inner city, so who knows what was going on with other people's lives. I would very often hear people arguing in the hallways. The walls weren't that thick, so
Hmm.
I could tell it wasn't the happiest people around me. So naturally, there could be beings that are coming to feed on them, and then they come. You're right downstairs, so it's easy to come and see what you're doing
Right.
too. Oh, you're having a bad time. Let me feed off you as well. So
Hmm. Yeah.
just if it's an option, if you can move, then move.
And I'll add to that is that buildings hold energy. I mean, the home I was in when I was having the bulk of these scary experiences, I was living alone, but that home had an energy to it that really it drew things in. And I
Yeah.
felt trapped there. I couldn't get out. Like I couldn't sell the house. I finally put it up for rent and got out of there. But um, that home definitely had gateways in it that I worked really hard to try to shut down. I tried to, using feng shui and house clearings and, other spiritual practices. But it just drew, I think, a combination of my energy and the makeup of the house's energy just was a perfect storm to have these experiences.
Yeah, I think my first building, the first apartment building I lived in was like an old motel. So who knows what happened back in back in the day there,
Yeah, a lot of
Yeah.
transient energy there. Absolutely.
Yeah. So who knows? Yeah. So anyway, so to bring it back to remote viewing. So
Hmm.
How did you first become aware that you could actually do this, do remote viewing? How, yeah.
I read a book back in 1997. It was Courtney Brown's book. It's either Cosmic Voyage or Cosmic Explorers, and that talked about remote viewings. This is like 97, 98. And in reading that book, he was talking about the government program, and he was looking at what he was looking at it. He was using remote viewing to focus on ETs. So I read that and I was fascinated. I was like, wow, I'm going to join the military and I'm going to become a remote viewer. So I joined the military, went to military intelligence, never figured out how to connect with the secret remote viewing program. I was too young and ignorant and inexperienced to ask the right questions. But that's how I first found out about it. So I had always been a believer in it. And then years later, the author of that book was now on YouTube, and he had these two remote viewers, Dick Allgire and Daz Smith, and they started doing these time cross projects every month. This is probably 8 to 10 years ago now. And I remember watching Dick and Daz, and they said, we're going to tell you what's going to be in the news next month. And I would watch them on a whiteboard go through their session and detail specifically the big headline of the following month's news. And I watched them for a couple of years, every month, predict the future. And I would watch it 1 month before it happened. My mind is still blown because they do it every month now. Now we've been doing this for a long time, watching them do it. And they're now, instead of one story, there's 4 or 5 viewers on the team now. They're each knocking out anywhere from like 4 to 10 stories a piece of what's going to happen in the news. And sometimes they overlap. Sometimes they're all unique. So I knew that it was real. I knew that it was possible. I knew that I was capable of doing it because I had other intuitive experiences. I just needed somebody to train me. And so Daz started training me. He put me through his training course. I guess it took about a year to go through it. And he just started teaching me the stages and feeding me targets. And, each stage you get to see a little bit more of the target. You get to do a little bit more. And I was starting to describe these things for those who aren't familiar with remote viewing, all you're given is an 8-digit coordinate. So I may have here's your number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Describe what target that represents. That number is affiliated with a target. So that's all I know. So I'd write down my number. I'd go through my process and I'd start sketching things out. I'd start describing, what it looks like, what it tastes like, what it smells like, all those things. And then you get your feedback and you compare them. And sometimes I'm not great at sketching the building. I'm better at different aspects of remote viewing, but you look at your data and you look at the picture or the story that you're describing and you're amazed at, like, wow, how did I do that? All I had was the numbers. So there's a process that you go through. So that I started remote viewing probably 2018, 2019. I still consider myself a rookie because there's just so much to learn, but it's been a fascinating journey with the things I've gotten to explore.
Interesting. When I was talking to Edward, I had the question of the coordinates, and I know the military used to use the coordinates, and then eventually, I guess they figured out that it doesn't really matter. It could just be a random set of numbers, and
Yeah.
you can still locate the target.
So here's what's cool. What I do right now, I'm always trying. I try to follow in the footsteps of my mentors, and I work with a group called the Future Forecasting Group, and this is real remote viewing, operational remote viewing, and they started looking at just cryptocurrencies and the impact that this shifting economy has on our society in so many ways. And that has evolved also into every month looking into the future. We have that experiment going on, and then looking at world mystery targets. So sometimes it'll be a UFO or an ET mystery. Sometimes it'll be looking at an ancient megalithic site from the past. Sometimes we'll be going out beyond the future to see how far out we can see. There's a lot of different avenues that we explore. But what I've learned is that really those esoteric targets, those targets that we don't have a lot of feedback on, they're a lot of fun. You can get a lot of good information, but you can't get accurate feedback. And feedback is so very important to help calibrate your mind. And it's so very important, in my opinion, to help establish your credibility as a remote viewer, because I need to be able to say, I was supposed to look at the pyramid and I sketched the pyramid, or I was supposed to look at the pyramid and I sketched a fish. So I'm way off. I need to do some work to get myself back on track. So I've started doing these verifiable targets. There's targets all over the place where you go online to these, they call them target pools, and there's target coordinates. And all you do is write down the target coordinates and you do your session. When you're done, you go back and you click it and you see how well did I do. I know there's some apps out there as well for people who are practicing. This is just my method. And what I've started doing now is I will just go to Google random number generator and I'll have it generate a target ID for me. And I write down that target ID and I'll go through and I'll work my session. And once I feel like I'm done with that session, could be one session, could be 3 sessions, could take me a day, could take me 3 weeks to 2 months to do, depending on how I'm feeling. I will then either have somebody send me a target, or I'll go online and I'll find a number and I'll click that number. I'm not shopping around for a target that fits my data. I pick the first one that I feel drawn to, and I'm finding that my data is still accurate. So it doesn't really matter where you're getting your target ID from, as long as it's a randomly generated and has no affiliation with anything. Your intention is what matters. This target ID represents the target that I'm going to eventually be given feedback for. And that's what I found is what gets me on target.
You said you type in Google a random number generator.
Yeah, I literally just go to Google and type in the words random number generator, and then it'll allow you to pick how many digits you want it to be. I usually have 1 digit between 0 and 9 or 0 and 10. And I just click generate and it'll give me one number and I write it down. I click generate and I write it down, generate and I'll write it down until I have 8 numbers. And that's what I'll use for my target ID. So I'm not sitting here picking something that's affiliated with like my birthday or the date or anything like that. I will use a date if I'm trying to do a particular like world event and see into the future. I'll just write the date down and go from there. But for the most part, I just use the random number generator, and that works for me in my process.
Now, my question is, how does that correlate towards the target that you're supposed to be focusing on?
So it's about intention, right? And I'll write this out at the beginning of my session. This target ID will be assigned to a target ID that I forget how I word it, but I note that this target ID, my random number generator target ID, correlates to the target ID of the future target that I have not yet been assigned that will be given to me post-session.
Got it.
And I don't even know that I have to write that down. That's just my process. It's about your intention here. But with remote viewing, you want to be very careful to not be front-loaded. Front-loaded means I know what the target is. And there's nuances to that, which if we wanted to get technical, we could go into it. But for the most part, you want to stay blind to the target because it keeps everybody honest, right? You want to remote viewing, this is what Edward used to tell me. I mean, it'll chew you up and spit you out. It can be very challenging. In the beginning, you tend to have a lot of success. And then when you really start settling in, then you start missing the target. You start going off because your imagination really fights back. And if you know what the target is, or you have an idea what the target is, how can you tell if you're getting raw remote viewing data or if it's your imagination telling the story and filling in the blanks? So it's better to stay blind to a target. And I'm not saying you can't do a front-loaded target. I do them from time to time. But the value of that data is not as strong because you knew what it was. So I can't rule out that you're making this up. If that makes sense.
Yes. And the target is given to you by when you're going in with the future forecasting, once you go into like a session or something?
I get targets from a variety of people, and I'm not one of the primary viewers. For the future forecasters, I host our podcast, the Future Forecast Podcast. And my job used to be to debrief all of the viewers. I did that for 4 or 5 years. They'd do their sessions. I'd review their sessions. We'd talk about it. I'd ask questions. It was great. I've stepped out of that role. Sean Mahoney's the host now. He does a great job. And now I just do the podcast where I can take these deep dives. But a target gets issued we have what's called a tasker. You have a targeteer, you have a tasker. The tasker comes up with the idea of, hey, here's what I want us to look at, right? I want to look at the Battle of Gettysburg and find out more about it. And then your targeteer describes that target and gathers feedback for that target in a way that is specific enough to get the viewers on target. If they just said, describe the Battle of Gettysburg, viewers are going to come back with a lot of different stuff, right? Because so many things happen with that. The targeteer is going to say, what happened at this exact location at this exact time? Describe what you see. So now we're honing in. It puts everybody in focus on a spot. There's value to having a broad target, but it's a lot harder for the viewers to focus on because there's so much noise going on. So the targeteer's job is to narrow that down. After he has a target package complete, he'll send out, an email or an alert with all they have is the target ID, and they know, okay, I got to do this, and it has to be done by this date, and then they send it in. So then everything's time stamped as well, so we can track yep, they submitted this before we provided them with the feedback, just to keep everybody honest. That's basically how the process works. But if you don't necessarily have to have that whole system, there's been times where I've called up a friend and I've said, hey, I'm going to work a session. I need you to think of a target, and they have no remote viewing experience. And I do the session, and then they give me the target, and it's worked that way as well. So, but to really get technical and do it per the structured protocols, you want to have somebody who's trained and knows how to create proper tasking, because the wrong type of tasking can send you off onto tangents. You can send you off into the imagination of the targeteer or the tasker if it's not done correctly. So there's a lot of tiny little psychic nuances that come up if you're not doing it the right way.
Right. Yeah, and I remember Edward gave good feedback because I was asking about whether he's remote view things off planet, and he gave some stuff that he remote viewed off planet, but he was saying that he's careful with those things because, like you
Yes.
just said, it's important to get feedback on whether you're accurate or not.
Right.
And with off planet things, there's no way of knowing if what you're seeing is actually correct or
Correct.
not.
And a lot of what I'm saying are things I've learned from Edward. He takes, the whole team does, but speaking on Edward, he takes his remote viewing so seriously, and he's very careful with the targets he works, and when he gets those targets, how he presents that information. He wants to do a real remote viewing that can be verified. He's in it for that experience. It's fun to do those other exploratory targets, but like I said, if I could go sit here and tell you, yeah, there's an underground city on Mars, and I may have all this great data, that's great. It's interesting. It's fascinating. But right now, I can't prove that that's accurate. But it sells, right? It sells. People hear about that.
Yeah.
And I know what I love about our team is our integrity matters. Like on my own personal channel, when I do those types of projects, I'm giving those personal disclaimers all the time. I don't want people to take that work and be like, I'm going to go make a spiritual decision right now because Dennis had this one remote viewing experience. I'm also a creative science fiction writer, so sometimes I may just tap into my imagination because I get an idea. The difference between what's my imagination sometimes and what is signal can be a fine line, and the more you view, the more fine-tuned it becomes. But we all have off days, and with a target like that, you have to get feedback if you're going to take it seriously.
Yeah, and I completely understand and respect that totally. And I would usually leave those type of things up to the channelers, the people who do channeling, because a lot of times they're connecting with non human beings who are on different planets or angels or whatever else, because that's more their expertise, because they're open to whatever comes, and that's cool. But I definitely understand with remote viewing, you want to definitely kind of focus on what's happening here and now, what's tangible, what's verifiable, so you can continue to get better at that skill and craft. And
well, then you can use it, when you do use it appropriately for those esoteric targets. I mean, we have so many of the esoteric targets out there that we've worked. We just always give that caveat, right, that we can't verify this information right now. Some of my most fun targets have been looking at things, like what's going on at Skinwalker Ranch or the Council of Nine we looked at a few years back.
What's that?
The Council of Nine is, if you're familiar with the raw material.
Yes.
The Law of One, we did a project targeting that.
Oh, wow.
That was a lot of fun. I just managed a project within the last year looking at the origin of Reiki energy, and seeing what the viewers brought back. Can't verify all the data. There's elements of it you can definitely verify, but they're fun and they're fascinating. They give you things to think about, and I think they're still valuable, right? Being able to verify something, be able to take value from something are two different things. So I may not be able to verify all the information, but for me, spiritually, I found a lot of value in the data the viewers brought back and the conversations we've had with them.
So, could you give a quick disclaimer and then can we talk about that? Because I I want to hear more about the Council of Nine and the Reiki and all. I want to hear about all the esoteric stuff. That's my field. This is what this is about.
Yeah, I think disclaimers given. I mean, take it with a grain of salt. I mean, we used remote viewers here to gather this information, but that information, you always want to verify it. It's not the same as I just sketched the building and here's a picture of the building and you did a great job, right? You can't verify
Right.
it. They're fun to do, but you need to be careful in how you're using that information. But with that being said, I mean, I think what I'm doing is in the process of compiling book 3 in my I Am Human series. When I was done with book 2, I was like, that's it. That was I think I had 46 sources of information that I had pulled from, and it was just a lot of brain power, and it was exhausting. And I said, I'm done writing these kind of books. And now I think I'm moving towards using remote viewing data with my disclaimers to tell the third installment of that series. But where do you want me to begin? I mean, Council 9, it's a little bit blurry. It's available, out there on our YouTube channels. Daz started the Hellfire Remote Viewing Club. So you can find that at hellfirerv.com to look for some of these projects. Also through my channel, you can find these things too. But the Council of 9, looking at the Law of One, if memory serves, there were some people who were channeling. And the one woman was acting as they called her an instrument for Ra. And when they asked who Ra was some advanced society. And the single voice of the woman coming through the woman was actually the voice of their collective. So it was as if it was a shared consciousness, many voices speaking as one. It was a neat thing. And they went through to talk about, and this gets a little new agey here. I try not to push that too much, but it gets into the energetic shift. We're moving into a new earth type of story that we've heard before, the new era that's coming in. And the word they used was souls will be harvested to the next phase, the next stage. So some people, when your soul is ready, basically the energy shifts and it moves into the next stage of spiritual evolution. Those that aren't ready, they get recycled and they have to go through the process again. So what our data ended up bringing back, I forget what the specific tasking was, but we had a lot of like ET UFO data that was talking on the manipulation of society. I remember mine, I had one scene, it was like a person on a table, and an energy pod was connected behind them. And I'm not saying that this is necessarily dark or bad, but the overall theme behind this was that the human species is being guided by a higher intelligence power, if memory serves, with what I was seeing from that one. Any questions on that before I keep going?
No. I love to talk about the Law of One, and if anyone wants to look it up, definitely do it. It's with Carla Ruckert, Don
That's
Elkins,
what it was.
and John
Yeah.
McCarthy. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I have all the books, and I, I just read it all the time. It's that and
Yeah.
the
It's a
Kabbalion
fascinating
are
story.
really interesting. Yeah, that
Yeah.
and Kabbalion are my two books that I just kind of go to. I'm very much into the
Kabbalion's a
Hermetic
heavy one.
principles.
Yeah. It's a heavy
Yeah,
one.
yeah. But yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So what's interesting, I want to shift to another project that we worked, and this was through Hellfire too. I can't remember who tasked this one to us, but we looked at something of Philip, the conjuring of Philip. And this was an experiment, a parapsychology experiment of can we create an entity through purely fictional means, through consciousness, and then have it communicate with us. So, and they did. They were using like the table knocking thing, or whatever. They created this backstory on this person named Philip who didn't really ever exist. And then they were able to use, I think, channeling techniques and the wobbling table. I'm not familiar with that process, to have Philip communicate with them. I can remember my data on that, and I kept describing it as, this seems like a movie set to me. There's a life form here, and they're contained within a bubble. They're contained within this bubble of reality, and they don't see the man behind the curtain, right? He was manipulating this person's reality. So when you look back at the feedback on that, it was showing how, yeah, consciously they created this entity that then existed and wasn't aware that it was being influenced. And it begged a question for me, is that similar to what's going on with us? Are we a conjuring of someone else's creation? Maybe a bit more technical, maybe a bit more involved. But is that what this creative process is? So I have things like that in mind when I start hearing things like the Council of Nine data. But what got really cool was when I think this was another Hellfire target. We were looking at the hitchhiker effect. If you ever watched the Skinwalker Ranch documentary, there's a book called Skinwalkers at the Pentagon. There is a part of that book, Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, talks about the hitchhiker effect. Multiple people who have been to Skinwalker Ranch and have had a paranormal experience brought things home with them. Credible people, scientists, government employees. They brought an experience home with them. There was one guy by the name of Axelrod mentioned in the book. And once he got home, he started seeing this giant wolf-like creature in his backyard. They started finding claw marks on the trees. Not only did he start having those experiences, but it passed on to his children. And I believe it passed on to some of their friends. Some of these people also came down with autoimmune disease and various ailments as well. It had physical effects on their physical bodies. Maybe even some cancers came through as well. So it wasn't all, sunshine and rainbows for them. There was a lot of dark stuff that was happening. We were tasked to look at this hitchhiker effect. My data has stuck with me for a very long time. What I ended up tapping into was the theme, and I see this theme in a lot of my sessions coming through, and it ties into my work as a writer. I don't know if that means that I am on an intuitive thread and seeking out this data, or I'm making it all up. But I did get corroborating data from other viewers on this as well, so I think this is pretty good data. But it was these gardeners, Nadrum is a tiny little being, and they plant a seed in the mind of someone or the mind of many. And, it was saying, the knowledge given, you don't pay for the knowledge when you receive it. You pay for it as you process it. And that really stuck with me as I'm going through this journey. Like, you get the intuitive download, you get the spiritual download. And then the challenge you go through, the changes and the growth that you go through over time, as you try to unpack that knowledge and process it and then assimilate it into your life. And then maybe some of us then disseminate it, right? I have a podcast, I have books, and the other work that I do. That's the payment for that knowledge. And I drew a picture of a man with a plant growing out of his mind. And that was, the seed has been planted and it's growing. And the idea was that it's going to be a new thought form, a new way of looking at things, a paradigm shift that's coming. And it starts with one mind, and then it ripples throughout society and starts to impact everybody eventually in growth. And when you look at what's happening now with the UAP disclosure, and people are being more open to consciousness exploration and psychic phenomena, I think I was on par with that. I think we are going through a spiritual shift here on the planet. And I think that my session spoke to that. But again, I had the theme of there's a hand behind that. There's a hand that's influencing that. And some of us have more profound experiences than others. And those experiences may seem awful and tragic and horrible. And from some perspectives, they are. But I would say if you take the step back, and I'm completely giving my opinion here, of a more technologically advanced or more intelligent species that's looking at the big picture and not the sacrifice of one, it can enact a major change that might benefit everybody. And I'm not justifying those methods at all, but that was the overall theme I had as I was going through that.
And this is related to the Skinwalker Ranch.
That was tied into my Skinwalker Ranch data. Yeah.
And it was like sending information to people, like.
The theme was, it's been a while since I worked this target. The theme was, it was the experiences, right? Those paranormal, scary experiences caused a change in your thought patterns, in your perceptions of things. And sometimes you get direct downloads of information as well during those experiences, right? But the overall perceptions that were coming in as a result of their experience on Skinwalker Ranch was causing all this growth. There was a purpose behind everything that was going on that down the line was changing the minds of the people that were going through it, which would eventually impact the minds of many.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's very interesting because it also kind of reminds me in a way a bit of what was happening with the Law of One. It's kind of just like beings interacting with humans, transmitting
Yeah.
information, knowledge to be used at a later date.
Yeah.
Or have you all ever? Well, I guess this would be kind of like an esoteric question, but it's still Earth. Have you guys been able to like view future versions of human beings and how that would look?
They were doing experiments recently in looking at the future and how far out can we look. And what it sounds like, and I'm by no means the expert, and I'm standing on the shoulders of my colleagues here, so forgive me. Um, but what it looks like is the further out you go, the harder it is to predict the future. Now, there are, I'm sure, certain things that are definitely fixed in the timeline. But other things, there are so many variables the further out you go that things could change. So, 2 years ago, I could have sat down and said, who's going to win the presidential election blindly, wrote down my, description of who the winner is, and gotten one answer. And then today I could sit down and do it and have a completely different answer. And for all I know, without that bigger perspective, both could be right. But between the time I did that first session and the time I'm doing this session now, so many variables have changed the future. Or is it a matter of maybe my own consciousness has changed to a different timeline? I don't know how all of this works. I'm just talking theories and ideas out there. I know there are other viewers out there, not with the future forecasters, who have gone out and told stories about the future and things really far out. Bob Monroe, the out of body experiencer, he wrote 3 books. In his second book, Far Journeys, I think it was Far Journeys. He, I think, goes out to the year 3000, and he describes as pretty cool. Almost like humanity becomes like an avatar for consciousness to go in and have these experiences. So there are people out there that have had some descriptions of it, but I personally don't have knowledge or experience with going that far out.
Do you remember a little bit more of what Bob Monroe said about 3000? Like,
Yeah,
is it
don't
really
quote
just
me
like the
on the
movie?
year,
Okay, go ahead.
but he was traveling through varying different planes of reality, I guess, as he's exploring the astral. And he went out into the future. And in this experience, he ended up stepping into, he had an experience that felt like real physical reality. That's how deep into this state he was. And he was on an island. It was a natural setting, and there was a man and a woman. I don't think that they were clothed. I think it was just really natural and free. And they were talking about, this is the book that talked about Lush, right? Earlier in the book, it was horrifying. He gave a Garden of Eden description and basically went through and said that the garden was created because they were trying to refine this Lush, which was that energy of fear. And so nature was created to consume itself because at the moment of death, pure Lush was filled. So they found more and more ways to, prolong that experience of fear and of death. And ultimately through that process, they ended up finding that loneliness along with fear are two of the strongest producers of the Lush they were trying to get to. But he said that all changed when he went further out into the future. He said the psychic noise surrounding the planet had subsided. Everything was calmer and more harmonious. And he said that the human species understood the purpose of Lush and now basically willingly participated in its creation. And the way they did that was I can't remember all the animals that he used, but he talks about how all of a sudden, he had an experience as a fish and he's swimming through and there's a predator chasing him and it's coming after him. And, it was this scary thing. And then boom, he's back having this experience again as a human on this beach. So if memory serves, they were shifting their perspective into the awareness of, animals and things because they were participating in this creation of loose energy through the varying experiences you're able to have. And they had more freedom to choose, what do I want to experience today? And if you think of it like a virtual reality system, it's getting more and more immersive. That's what it sounded like he was describing.
Fascinating. Interesting stuff right there. Huh. I'll switch gears. So for the audience who is very much interested in remote viewing, they want to learn more about it. They want to know if they can do it themselves. What's a good starting point? Is there something that they can like experiment with at home before like reaching out to a professional practitioner to further develop their skills?
Yeah, I would say read the books that you can find on it. There's plenty of books out there. Daz Smith's website, remoteviewed.com, has a ton of resources on there. I think he's got some free lessons on there too. Don't quote me on that, but he's got a wealth of resources. Start reading about remote viewing and the process. There's different kinds of remote viewing that work very different ways. HRVG, the Hawaii Remote Viewers Guild, is a very visual based style of remote viewing. They get great results. We all love seeing the picture, but not all minds work that way. I'm not a very visual person. I like to describe things, so I use what's called controlled remote viewing, CRV, and right now I'm actually using Flow, which is Daz's method that has evolved from CRV. CRV was developed by Ingo Swann through Stanford University back in the 70s. So that's kind of the original that was developed. And then it has expanded upon since. So read about the different styles, find what feels right for you. And I recommend watching remote viewers at work. I'm going to give a plug for the company I work for, but the Future Forecasters, futureforecastinggroup.com. I learned so much every week sitting there and watching the viewers talk about their sessions. I see how they progress through the stages. I hear them explain what they were targeting and how they were targeting it, and I can see how they recorded their data. If you're really interested in remote viewing, I say you can immerse yourself in it by just watching other people do it, and that will enhance your practice of it. And then there's plenty of teachers out there. I know we offer courses through Future Forecasters as well. Find one that resonates with you. Find one that's going to be able to give you feedback on an ongoing basis. There's definitely those, you can go learn remote viewing in a day, and I'm not knocking that at all. I've never taken it. But I know of some of the teachers who are credible people. And then there's some teachers out there who aren't so credible. So do your homework, check their credentials, check the comments of the students that come back and say it. So it's a lot easier now to get training, whether you're going for free at first or you're going to pay for a course, than it was years ago. But there's a lot of places you can go to find that information.
Are there certain groups of people who are more naturally kind of like skilled in that area already? Maybe if they have maybe a bit of already psychic tuning, maybe they had an interesting childhood where they kind of maybe had out of body experiences, or they're able to automatically remote view as a kid or something?
Great question. I'll answer that in two parts. Yes, number one, to keep it simple, anybody can learn to remote view. Not everybody's going to be a Michael Jordan, right? We all have our different strengths and our different weaknesses here. So there's varying levels, but it also, how much work are you putting into it, right? I mean, it's great in the beginning, but 10 years from now, 20 years from now, are you still practicing every day? What I found in the research for my book is that, we have basically our sixth sense. There's several senses, but let's say our sixth sense, our intuitive sense. The more you use it and the more you get feedback on how well you're using it, the stronger it grows. So the more you practice that psychic muscle, the better you will get at using it, the more sensitive you will be. Psychic signals. I know when we look at Hollywood, you got the guy, he's sitting there, he's driving in the car, and all of a sudden he like shocks, his eyes roll in the back of his head and he gets this vision. It's not really like that. You'll be sitting there and you'll go, what was that thought? It was something that was so subtle, and then you have to go unpack it. It's such a subtle nuance with psychic data, it can easily be missed. And remote viewing, you can be psychic without using remote viewing. Remote viewing is the scientific process of going through a set of protocols and procedures to gather information. I can gather information psychically and it not be remote viewing. I know a lot of times people like to say, I was doing remote viewing. No, remote viewing is going through that process based on that specific set of protocols. Sage, I completely forgot the question you asked me. I was babbling so much, but I hope I answered it somewhere in there.
Yeah, it was just basically, are there people with natural, abilities
So
who
yes.
are, yeah.
Yes, there are, but people who are not psychic can also become excellent remote viewers.
I like the Michael Jordan analogy. Who would be the Michael Jordan of remote viewing? Is there?
I can't answer that question. I have too many friends. But I will answer it this way. I mean, you've got your Michael Jordans. I'm talking about the older players, right? Your Scottie Pippens, your Larry Birds. You have all these different great players who excel at different areas of remote viewing, right? I don't think there's just one who's like the best and the greatest. Everybody has their own style, their own approach, their own flavor, their own things that they look at and that they target. And those areas and styles appeal to different types of audiences. So I can't say enough good things about my friends at Future Forecasting. They are great at what they do, and they have been in the game for a very long time. And they do great work. That's all I can say, and they're great people.
Yeah, that's good. I like that answer. That's a
Thank
good
you.
answer. Have you ever been remote viewing and felt that something else was watching you?
That's a fun question, and different viewers will give you different answers. I've had one or two experiences. Maybe. Okay. I'm not going to get into one because I still have an active target out. But I did. The one I can think of, we were tasked to look at the famous Tic Tac UFO, and I did have a moment where I felt that I was engaging with a consciousness that knowingly knew I was there, and it was relaying information. I think about changes in emotional states and the impact they have on energy. I can't remember specifically what it was, but it was like this orb, and it was one of the few times I felt this knows I'm here and it's sharing information with me. So yeah, I have worked with viewers who at times have said, usually it's with your esoteric targets, who have said, yep, it's where I'm here, and either it doesn't want me here or it's sharing information with me, or I'm just a fly on the wall and it's ignoring me because I don't matter compared to how intelligent this thing is. I have heard a few other viewers have experiences.
I specifically asked that question because it reminds me of a dream that I had last night, in which during my childhood I had experiences with the Greys, and some people might be familiar with the Greys. I think you're familiar with the Greys. And I haven't had a dream about the Greys in a long time, like many years. So this is really interesting that I just had this dream last night, but it reminded me of the body's automatic reaction towards what it would perceive as a predator. And the Greys give my body that predator sensation immediately. And my dream is that I don't know if this is my childhood again or a different kind of aspect, but I just remember seeing them through the window, looking through the window, and immediately as soon as we made eye contact, my body tensed up and I was having this strict it's almost kind of like that feeling where I was being fed on, but it didn't really feel like that. It was more like a fear-based response.
Fear.
Not like something was feeding on me, but like more like I'm terrified. And I just kept having that, and I was trying to like come out of that state. I was trying to come out of that dream, and it just reminded me of that state of being in which you kind of feel like something's observing you. And
Yeah.
yeah,
That's a scary. I've been there. Bringing it back to the Skinwalker Ranch stuff, I think in the book Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, they talk about now. There are these guys that were, I forget who they were. They're soldiers. They're the real deal, combat seasoned, well experienced soldiers, and they're walking down a road at night on this ranch, investigating something, and they start becoming afraid. And the further they walk, the fear amps up and amps up. Now, these are the guys that go into the most dangerous places in the world, but the fear became so overwhelming, it crippled them. They shut down and they had to move away. And as they moved away, the fear subsided. I mean, I've been in a lot of fight and flight situations, and very few times have I like frozen or felt I need to back away. I have some of that. I'm nowhere near what those guys are, but I have some of that experience where it's like you're going to push through that scary stuff and you're going to go do your job. I've also had those experiences in the spiritual world where it's like, this is so scary and I am not going anywhere near this, and I'll do anything I can to get away from it. And it sounds, from in my opinion, that these entities have the ability to induce very high states of fear in you to keep you away. I don't know that that necessarily means you're a threat. We may be the threat, and that may be their defense mechanism. I honestly don't know, but I've had those exact experiences with those types of entities where that state of fear just hits you, and you'll do anything to get away from it. And then sometimes instead of getting away from it, you're like, you know what? I'm going to go to sleep, which makes no sense whatsoever, right? This is the scariest thing in my life, and it's a great time for me to take a nap. I just never understood that. But
exactly. Yeah. Wow. Okay, well, we reached the top of the hour, so I like to ask my closing questions that I usually ask all of my guests.
Sure.
So, what does love mean to you, Dennis?
Wow, that's a great question. I will say that it's harmony. Love is harmony. It's seeing yourself in another, and wanting the absolute best experience and sharing in the joy of that experience for the other, whether you're a part of it or not.
Harmony. Yeah, I love that. And the last question is, what does the sun represent to you? Sun in the
Another
sky.
good question. Yeah, another good question. The sun represents, our source to life, the connection to higher. It brings us inspiration. It opens us up. It creates a sense of awe and wonder. It can be the basis for a lot of the beginnings of our understandings of the universe, night versus day, right? Good versus evil. The light comes down, the light bearer giving us knowledge, wisdom, and life, really. So I'd say the sun, in short, if I had to use one word, would represent inspiration.
I had never asked this question before, but I feel intuitively drawn to ask it to you right now. Is the sun a portal?
Wow, great question. I don't have any direct experience with that, but I have watched some of those videos where they are capturing what they're saying are craft up there, traveling through the sun. When a sun collapses, it becomes a black hole, which could possibly be a portal. Mentally, I think this just off the top of my head, thinking about this now on the spot. Um, it could be a portal through consciousness, right? We look at the sun and we get ideas, and that brings us somewhere else. So I would say, yes, the sun could act that way in a very real sense.
Nice. Just felt intuitive to ask it, and I just went along
Great question.
with it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So, where can people find out more and reach out to you if they want to connect with you?
Absolutely. You can find my books, my podcasts. I actually have a Reiki cohort getting ready to start up in October. You can sign up for if you want to learn Reiki or receive Reiki at sixthsensemedia.net. And that'll give you all of my links to everything that I've been working on. And then you can find my work with Future Forecasting at futureforecastinggroup.com. Those are my two places where you can find me. And, for all the remote viewers, you can find the Future Forecasting website.
Yeah, I'm sorry, you just reminded me of my the question I had earlier about Reiki.
Sure.
How did that look when you remote viewed like the origins of it, right?
Yeah, that was unexpected. I was actually ready to shut the project down because everybody was getting this data that made no sense to me at first. I had some data that tied in. The backstory, Dr. Usui went up on Mount Karama, and he was a truth seeker like us, right? And he's like, I'm going to find out the answer. If I don't, I'm ready to die. I'm not going to eat. I'm going to fast. I'm going to meditate. And that's it. That's all I'm going to do. Day 21, he's standing on a waterfall, and all of a sudden he gets like struck by lightning in his mind. He was famished. He was fatigued. He passes out. He gets up and he's like, I feel completely better. Oh my gosh, I just had this enlightening experience. I think I found Reiki. He's walking down to go tell everybody in the town. He's feeling better, as if he'd been eating the whole time. And he stubs his toe, and he's like, oh, I hurt my toe. And he reaches down, grabs his toe, and he's holding it. And that's when he first realized, oh, it doesn't hurt anymore. I have Reiki, right? I've got this new power. That's a quick down and dirty summary of what I wanted, the specific targeting I wanted them to look at. And the big themes that came up that were unexpected for me. There were some visuals of these, subspace beings, like angelic type of beings that were there. But then they all brought back information about fine particulates, or it was described as nanotechnology, or like spores. And I thought like maybe mushroom spores, right? And then several of the viewers described and then specifically named the planet Mars. And so there's this thread going through of this high technology in the form of either spores or nanotech that's on an energetic level that came from what seems like a failed high civilization on another planet, which I didn't expect at all. I was expecting either here's the energy and here's what it looks like and everybody has this really wonderful experience, or the story's not what they say it is because it's a great story to sell Reiki classes. But I think that something for sure supernatural did happen there with Dr. Usui. I know Reiki's the real deal, but you always wonder about the backstory, the origin stories, right? So in summary, because I know we're short on time, it was this off-planet high technology energy that was directed towards us at some point that we're now able to access.
Fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
Wow.
You can find the video. It's on YouTube. It's through my website and through the hellfirerv.com. You can find the whole debrief there. It's a really, really cool conversation.
Awesome. Wow. Yeah. Thank you so much for that brief explanation.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah. So thank you so much for your time, Dennis. I will put Dennis' contact information in the description box below in case you want to reach out to him. And thank you all for watching. If you made it this far, thank you so much. Praise the sun. We'll see you guys in the next one.
Thank you.